everyone, and welcome to Techstrong TV. Today is Monday, October 10th, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day so far. I'm your host, William Willis, and in today's show, we're going to bring you some fantastic interviews with incredible guests from around the world. So stay tuned. As always, I'm going to start off with our Techstrong News recap, filling you in on the biggest tech headlines that are making waves. Then we'll go over to Alan, where he will sit down with Yoav Regev, co-founder and CEO at Centra, where they will talk about knowing where an organization's sensitive and shadow data lives and how to best classify and protect it. Alan will then give his thoughts on the recent Sullivan case and Mudge's Twitter incident and how they both are spelling trouble for CISOs. We will then be airing episode 7 of the SRE show. In this episode, hosts Mitch Ashley and Austin Parker hear from our panel of experts, Anna Margarita Medina of Lightstep, Adriana Villela of Lightstep, Jason Harley of Honeycomb, and Ibrahim Bouamad of Calyx, as they discuss the mindset, prerequisites, and SRE principles you need to kickstart your SRE journey and how to scale your SRE practices along the way with your business. We're then joined by our very own Cody J. Brown, who will hop on and tell us more about some of the upcoming webinars. We then have 2 episodes of View with Vizard. In the first episode, Mike interviews AJ Grotto from the Cyber Policy Center at Stanford University, as AJ explains why application security is now a socioeconomic issue. Then Mike interviews Dr. Maria Bada, a behavioral scientist for AwareGo, as Maria explains what's required to make cybersecurity training effective. Then, to wrap up this broadcast, we go to Open Source Summit Europe, where Mike spoke with Electometa's CTO, Nicole Papler, as Nicole explained the appeal of the open source Zephyr operating system in application environments where safety is critical. That's what we have coming up for you on this episode of Techstrong TV. So without further ado, let's get the show started. Enjoy.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hi again, everyone. Here are the headlines for October 10th. First up, Google has stated it will open its first data center in Japan by 2023. The data center, which will be located in Insai City, Chiba, will be part of Google's $730 million fund to invest in local infrastructure through 2024. Google has said the new data center will help people with faster and more reliable access to its services, while also supporting economic activity and connecting Japan to the global economy. This will be Google's 3rd data center in Asia, after Taiwan and Singapore. Next, while lots of money is going into the construction of semiconductor chip plants, global demand for memory chips seems to be shrinking, as Samsung recently warned of a 32% hit to its profits. Due to weakening demand for consumer electronics, Samsung's profits for its microprocessing-making business suffered. Sales of the electronics devices have been hit as inflation has risen, and the companies that normally buy these chips have cut their purchases and plan to use their existing stocks instead. This gloomy forecast is expected to last until early next year, when things start to pick up again. In other news, a Nigerian advertising regulator has sued Meta for publishing unauthorized ads with a $70 million fine. Nigerian advertising law requires regulators to approve ads based on certain criteria, which is heavily examined by advertising practitioners in Nigeria. That means that before any ad is put out, it needs to be vetted and approved. The lawsuit states that Meta has disregarded this. In particular, the lawsuit cites ads directed at the Nigerian market through Facebook and Instagram. Next up, one of the world's largest insurance companies, Munich Re, has stated that it will stop backing new oil and gas fields beginning next April. The company also stated that they will no longer invest in or insure new oil pipelines and power plants, except those already under construction by the end of this year, in parts of their effort to reduce the harmful effect that businesses have on the planet. On Digital CXO, we have an article looking at the future of financial transactions using smart contracts. Smart contracts, which are business rules written as software code and deployed using the blockchain network, could accelerate business transactions with unprecedented efficiency. To learn more about smart contracts, go to digitalcxo.com. On Security Boulevard, we have an article looking at a recent report that attributes two separate cybercriminal gangs from China to the same source. The report found that the tactics and procedures used by both groups strongly resembled each other, and the two groups are now being known as Emperor Dragonfly. To learn more about the report and its implications, go to securityboulevard.com. Finally, on DevOps.com, we have an article looking at how to prevent turnover in DevOps teams. The average software engineer turnover right now is 57.3%, but change-ups can stifle progress and development. This article looks at ways to minimize this turnover in DevOps teams, including reducing context switching, combining engineering and product teams, and not underestimating the importance of flexibility. To learn more, go to DevOps.com. And that's today's Techstrong News Recap.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Techstrong TV segment. I'm happy to tell you about a company that is breaking into the U.S. market. We have their co-founder CEO here. His name is Yoav Regev. Yoav, welcome. Welcome to Techstrong TV. Yoav is with Centra.
Great to be here.
Welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me, especially these days. So my name is Yoav Regev. I'm the CEO of Centra. And I just moved with my family to New York City a few weeks ago. Very exciting for all of us.
Really? Oh, good for you. I'm from New York originally. Well, we'll talk offline. I don't want you to give out personal information on here. But welcome to New York. It's still home for I moved out of New York 20 years ago. But it's still home for me when I only feel home when I land back in New York, and I'm happy to hear. So, it's great that you've moved to New York, but if you don't mind, give us a little of your personal history, your background prior to coming to New York.
Great to share that. So I spent about 25 years in the Israeli elite technology 8200. I started there in 97. As a developer, and since then did all the way till the head of the cyber department. I entered service about, it was last February, and a little bit after that, we founded Centra. So it was a great journey. Of course, I can't talk a lot about that. By the way,
no, I'm sure if you could, we'd all be in trouble, so don't.
Exactly.
But that's a very, look, we've had the pleasure and privilege of having many former Unit 8200 folks on our shows over the years. 20 years is a very long time to be at 8200.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people put in there 4 to 6, maybe 8 years and then go into private. What made you, I'm a serial entrepreneur myself. I've started several companies, venture-backed companies. No one says, I feel like starting a startup and just does it. Everyone, you got to have sort of a burning desire that you're doing something important, that you're doing something worthwhile, that you're willing to put, your blood, sweat, and tears into it. What about Centra made you feel that way?
So after the long service, I asked myself, and pretty fast I did it with my friends, my co-founders, what we can do that can let us go big to try to solve a very big problem that are relevant these times. And we understood that what we should do is to deal with data security. Because first of all, we really love the data security area. We have a lot of experience and deep knowledge of that. And I really believe that this is a fundamental for the for the world for the next 2 years, because based on data security, we can move fast, even much more faster than we run today. And I talk from the business angle, and we believe that we need and we can solve that problem for the rest of the world.
Yoav, I've been in cyber now 25 years. And it's interesting, we didn't call it cyber then, we called it security, InfoSec. But during those 25 years, there was first a very big emphasis on network security. right? The firewall, the router, the IDS, the moat and castle, the perimeter, that whole thing.
Exactly.
And then with the move to cloud and some of the other things, the focus really became on AppSec. It was all about the application, buffer overflows and so forth, right? And really making sure your application wasn't vulnerable. I think it's only in the last year, maybe 18 months, where it's like someone said, hey, it's all about the data, stupid, right? It's all about the data. The application's important, the network, the perimeter, the cloud, it's all important. But at the end of the day, the data is the crown jewels. It's the guts of it. And so we're starting to see now this whole rise of data security really becoming, transcendent. What exactly does Centra do around this whole data security issue?
Couldn't agree more. So Centra is a data security platform, what we call these days a DSPM, emerging category that we couldn't say a few months ago. A DSPM, the data security posture management. This is the layer that deals with the data. So we discover, we classify, we make a risk assessment and analyze your data and let you find your top data risks and remediate it before it becomes an incident. As you just said before, your most valuable asset is the data itself. And we see the trends, like the data trends, data democratization, data movement. Every organization wants to create more data, to share more data. This is the most valuable process to make your business side fast. And when you combine it with the assumption that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when your organization will be breached, you have to deal with the data. You have to regain control and protect your data. And this is exactly the meeting point between the data and security. The Centra is coming in and let you to solve that. So with Centra, you can really enable your business even faster, but secure.
Got it. So you've moved to New York now, and the company is also entering the U.S. market, correct?
Yes, exactly. This is the market. This is the right place to be. Everything is going on here.
So beyond you moving to New York, tell us what else is the company doing here in the U.S.? So
this day we started to establish the fundamentals of the company here in the U.S. The first part, we have 2 people in the West Coast that are starting to deal with the customer interface. My mission here is to establish the first sales team. And with that, growing. All the go-to-market are going to be here at the end. This is the right place to be. As I said before, the market is here. The most data of the world is here. And we are here to protect it.
Got it. What about, existing customers, though? They're here, Israel, Europe, all over. What is...
What I really love in the data area, it's unlimited, and it's vertical agnostics, and it's, of course, country agnostics. So we have customers here in the US. We have customers, of course, in Israel. And at the end, we would like to grow, first of all, and most of all, here in the US. This is as I said before, the right place to emerge with the market. And after all, we would like to take it on.
Sure. Let me ask you a serious question, Yoav. What do you think is holding back greater adoption for this new category? And let's, for our audience maybe who didn't get it, the initials. Data, security, something platform, right?
DSPM, Data Security Posture Management, or Data Security
Posture Management, right.
DSPM. What do you think is... what's the hard part of the sell, if you will, in getting companies to say, I need that, because everyone likes to have, but successful companies are built on must-have. What makes DSPM a must-have?
Must-have. So from one hand, it's very easy because it's data. And as I said before, data is the most valuable asset. So in the minutes you understand that, it must have a data security platform that help you to run your business. On the other hand, of course, it's a little bit problematic because it's emerging category. People really, they know about the infrastructure, they know about the old perimeter and all that stuff. So the time, in the minutes, they really understand that they should change the paradigm and move to the data or starting with data is going to be very easy. And we can see it. We feel the market. We see it's getting faster and faster. Most of the security people really understand it. And now it's the right timing to go to the data because the fundamentals of the cloud, the technology, the infrastructure, they did very well, by the way, also from the product, from the security products. And now this is the right time to move to the data itself.
Good. Let's talk a little bit about Centra as a product. Is it offered as a SaaS type of offering, or how does a customer sort of engage here?
Yes, exactly. So we are a SaaS product, very, very easy to use and very easy onboarding because of the cloud technology and because of the API we have and the technology we have. It's less than a few minutes to connect to your environment. And after that, Centra run behind the scene. By the way, it's very important that no sensitive data leaves the customer environment. Very, very important. Mm-hmm. So we do it agentless, of course. And with our technology, we scan and get a great coverage, 100% of every piece of your data in the cloud, in the infrastructure cloud environment, and give you a full picture about that. So at the end, you can make sure that every piece of your data is in the right position and before an incident. And by the way, it's very, very, very easy to understand the value after you run Centra, because in hours, you get an amazing picture about every piece of your data store, data assets, and so on, and understand every policy violation. We have a very sophisticated policy engine that makes sure your data meets your policy from security, compliance, and privacy.
Got it. So, Yoav, you mentioned earlier that, look, data security doesn't know borders. Everybody needs data security, and that it's not really a particular vertical. All verticals need data security. But let's talk about the amount of data, right? Because, I mean, look, today people's data is through the roof, right? The amount of data they store. From the littlest, smallest company to the largest, I mean, the amount of data is just boggles my mind, right? But is there a particular sweet spot for Centra in either the size of the company or how much data or what kind of data that makes it a really powerful solution?
If you have a company and you have a data, so Centra is good for you, because it doesn't matter if you're a finance, retailer, e-commerce, whatever it is, data is, you start with data, you end with data, data is everything. So, and by the way, it's funny, a few years ago when you asked about the size of the company, always you asked how many employees they have. This is not true anymore.
That's not an accurate guide of anything, right?
Exactly. Data is much, much better. So sometimes even when I ask, people I work with, how much data do you have? Do you know how much you have and so on? And they can't tell me. It's funny. It's amazing to see. And even during our conversation, there is much more data in the world. So No, the answer, the right answer is no. It's agnostic for almost everything because data is everything. It's everywhere. As you said before, no borders. When we moved from the on-prem to the cloud, and this is when I said before, the right timing, because when you move to the cloud, you want to enjoy the cloud technology, the cloud movement. The easiest, it's so easy to create, to share, to move fast. Sometimes you can be a company with 20, 30 people that have much more data than the old 100 years company.
Yeah, no doubt. I get it. And you know, I mean, just the amounts of data that we store, right? I think at some point, companies are going to stratify their data into, you know, and depending how important that data is, will be how quick it could be retrieved, how tightly it's compressed, how maybe even how much security is applied to it. Because I think kind of a thing that's coming in this market is that not all data is equal.
Exactly.
Right.
Very good point that I didn't talk before. At the end, you have to prioritize. You have to understand because data is not the same. And there is a huge difference between sensitive and critical data, and let's call it regular data.
Right.
And part of our process, by the way, is when I said before classify, it's to understand the data and let you understand what is most sensitive and critical. And it's amazing to see that many companies even don't know what they have, where they have it, and with whom they share it and access and so on. And in the minute you can prioritize and understand that, you can really take an action. Because before that, people, they ask themselves, what can I do? They lost control. And we are here to regain the control. And specifically, and start with the sensitive and critical data. Exactly as you just said. Very good point.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yoav, you know what we didn't tell people? If they want to get more information about Sentra and look into it, where do they go?
Sorry again?
The webs. If people want to find out more about Sentra,
yeah.
we're on the web.
Of course. So Sentra.io, this is the right place to start with. Of course, you can find me in LinkedIn and all the rest of the guys from Sentra. But yeah, let us know through our website, and we're more than happy to connect, to show a very, very quick, easy POC. And from that point, we can go on and move faster.
Got it. Yoav, welcome to New York. Welcome to the U.S. Best of luck with Sentra. Come back on and keep us posted of what's going on, okay?
Sure, I'll be more than happy to be here whenever I can.
All righty. Go check out Sentra. That's Sentra.io, Sentra.io. A new data, platform manager, data security platform management, DSPM, right?
Exactly.
All right, I got it.
You are part of
a little bit.
You are part of the emerging category.
All righty. Sentra, check them out. We're going to take a break here on Techstrong. We'll be back in a minute. Hey, everyone. It's me, Alan Schimmel, CEO Techstrong. I don't have a guest for this session. I just felt like I wanted to say something. And, hey, luckily we have Techstrong TV to say it on. Like many of you and many of my friends out there in the cyber world, we were all a little bit taken aback this week when former Uber CISO Joe Sullivan was convicted by a San Francisco jury on 2 counts of concealing and lying about a ransomware security incident that took place at Uber. And there's a lot of reasons. Joe Sullivan was a fellow had kind of a stellar reputation in being a champion for cybersecurity throughout a very distinguished career. Came to Uber, and at the time, Uber was going through a very difficult time period, but he wasn't forthcoming, let's say, in meeting with the SEC or letting people know about a ransomware breach that took place there. Now, to Joe's defense, he said he was following orders, the old Nuremberg defense, and just following orders. But like in Nuremberg, here as well, just following orders and saying, well, I did it to save my job, doesn't absolve you, evidently, from criminal responsibility. You have an obligation to tell the truth. You have an obligation to alert the authorities, especially when specifically questioned. And though my heart breaks for Joe Sullivan, I understand why this verdict came down the way it did. Now, but I think this Joe Sullivan case, in the bigger picture of our cybersecurity world, has to be taken into context with the recent testimony and so-called whistleblower status of Mudge Zatko over at Twitter. Now here, that's almost exactly, this is the other side of the coin of what is the CISO's responsibility. Mudge just basically got fed up and decided he wasn't going to take it anymore, and wrote, a blistering, I forget how many, if it was 80 or hundreds of pages long thing, documenting what Twitter was not doing, right, that he thought they should be doing to safeguard the public's personally identifiable information and sensitive data, and not doing right around security. Right? And though I'm sure he brought this up internally before going public, the powers that be at Twitter decided not to ignore him per se, but not to act on it until the point where he felt it was his moral and legal obligation to come forward. You want to call that being a whistleblower, call it being a whistleblower, but, he did what he felt was right. So both of these gentlemen, Joe Sullivan and Mudge, did what they thought was right. And I don't know if any one of us, me included, are here to say which one is right and which one is wrong. But here's what I do know. This puts CISOs in a very rock and a hard place position. And not only CISOs, but all of us, folks in the cyber world. We want to do what's right for our employers. We want to do what's right for the public in general. We want to do what's right for ourselves and our careers. And our careers are important to us, obviously. But what is one to do? Do you, where is the where's the tack here? Where's the line that you take? Do you, one could say what Joe Sullivan did was, by the verdict, was very illegal. He withheld information. He lied, knowing that a breach had taken place and saying it did it. Was what Mudge did more the outburst or the culmination of being fed up and frustrated with the lack of action by a company entrusted with the public trust, Twitter, to do what he felt was the minimum reasonable actions they should be taking to secure the platform and people's data, right? And so he got to the point where if they weren't going to do anything about it, he was going to make sure the world knew it. And was that the right thing for him to do? I personally probably don't agree with it. I think he probably, went public a little prematurely, maybe keep working. But look, for many of you out there, including myself, probably we wouldn't have the stones that Mudge had. We probably would have quit our jobs at the worst, right? If we didn't just sit there, shut up, and take our paycheck every month, we would have quit our jobs and go find another place and let Twitter's security problems be the next CISO's problem over there. And you know what? Frankly, for too long in this industry, that's exactly what's happened. I think there's a lot of people who've done what Joe Sullivan says, which is toe the company line. Hey, we're not disclosing this quite yet, right? We've got shareholders, we've got a quarterly report coming up or whatever. And so they don't disclose as soon as they can. I think there's also a lot more people who say, hey, if you're not going to do what we think is the right thing about security, that's fine, I'm out of here. And they move on to their next role. And I think that probably plays a role in a lot of the, frequent hopping that we see in the CISO world, where, the average CISO stays in their job 18 months or less. I'll be honest, I'm not smart enough to tell you what's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do, though, depends on every situation, is its own situation. I think what we're seeing here in these two cases are two extremes, right? So to wrap this up, my advice for those of you out there, CISOs, wannabe CISOs, people in cyber who are dealing with this issue is, look, it's never a good idea to lie. Absolutely not. Never a good idea to lie, especially to a government agency or anything like that. On the other hand, before going mudge, if you will, we'll use that as a verb, and going public and blowing the whistle, is the right thing to do leave the job and go find another job? Maybe, maybe not. I think at the end of the day, what he did, Mudge, with Twitter, really shined a light on what security controls practices are being used there. But I just don't know if that's the right thing to do. It's certainly not the right thing to do in all circumstances. Nevertheless, though, these two cases, I think, wind up being intrinsically connected. And I think they present a dilemma for today's cybersecurity professional, today's CISOs, on navigating the right course between being too much of a company person versus too much of the maverick. And, it's not an always easy course to sail and to plot. And I think there'll be a lot of other CISOs who have a very hard time plotting that course. But these are certainly two examples that have brought home really how hard it is to be a CISO, to be the person responsible for cybersecurity at large companies who have a lot of, very sensitive data. At some level, I feel sorry for both of these gentlemen, for Mudge and for Joe Sullivan. It's certainly not what they signed up for, I'll bet. But that is the job today. And so, you've got to tip your hat to CISOs. They've got a really hard job. It's getting harder. This doesn't even get to the fact of, well, what am I doing day to day to protect things? I hope over the next weeks and months, this situation kind of clarifies itself and CISOs can get more guidance. I think that's one of the reasons we need more CISO peer type of organizations. CISOs need to be able to talk to other CISOs in confidence about, hey, what's the right thing to do here, right? We need that sort of organizational help. Anyway, again, thanks for listening. It's a difficult situation. We'll be watching it as it further develops.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and Techstrong TV.
Hello and welcome to the SRE Show. SRE Show is sponsored by Lightstep, a ServiceNow company. Got some great panelists here. My co-host, Austin Parker. How you doing, Austin?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's always good to be with you and this fabulous crew. We are going to be talking about how to establish or experiences from establishing an SRE practice, function, whatever you might want to call it in your organization. Kind of maybe lessons learned, maybe experiences that we've had, all the above. So before we get into our topic, again, thank you to the good folks at Lightstep for sponsoring our show. Let's do a little bit round of introductions, and then I'm going to have Anna actually do the topic. So let's make her go last, and then she can start the topic off. Austin, for folks that don't know you, why don't you say just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Austin Parker, head of developer relations at Lightstep, author, speaker, bon vivant, quite a few things. Niche
All good.
internet micro celebrity, as we discussed on the before the recording, but was it?
Yeah, we were having that conversation. Great term. All right, somebody jump in. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. Hey, I'm Adriana Villela. I'm a developer advocate at Lightstep. Part of that, I managed a platform team and an observability practices team at Two Cows. Have a background in software engineering, but DevOps and I found each other like 8 years ago or so, and it's been a love affair ever since. So now I've since expanded into SRE and observability, and it's been awesome.
All right, who wants to jump in there next?
Thank you, Jason. I'm Jason Harley. I am currently a senior software developer at Honeycomb. Prior to doing that, I have done a variety of jobs in tech, but multiple tours in operations or site reliability engineering or DevOps in a leadership and an IC capacity. Excited to be here today.
Fantastic. Great to have all of you. Ibrahim?
Yeah, I'm Ibrahim. Maybe I'll say this. I just finished my term with Two Cows, and I'm moving to a new journey, starting in 1 hour. My study. So after this, I'll be signing in the laptop and doing the email and stuff. So
And that's what I call being in between jobs.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thanks for having the time to fit this in between jobs. That was a pretty short stint.
That's actually like a pretty kick-ass way to start your first day. It's like you walk into onboarding. It's like, what have you been up to? It's like, oh, I was just guest speaking somewhere. Like you hire someone that knows what they're doing.
Not bad. Yeah, it is. Talk about making an impression, right? Anna, if you would go, and then you can kick off our topic.
My name's Ana Margarita Medina. I'm a staff developer advocate at Lightstep. Prior to joining Lightstep, I did developer advocacy at Gremlin, where I help companies like do chaos engineering, and that meant like help them embark in their SRE journey sometimes. And prior to that, I actually did SRE at Uber and like some cloud infrastructure work, which is where I came about the world of SRE and reliability. Because prior to that, I was that engineer that it works on a machine. Doesn't really matter. Didn't really know about ops and systems. So it was always kind of nice to like get slapped in the ground. And it's like, now you need to understand systems and SRE and like be on call. But like it became a lot of like learning and like trying to understand architecture and like why decisions had gotten made, which was very much different from what we're here to talk about today. Like, how do you go about actually like starting something as a small startup? I kind of got a chance to walk into an organization that had already established SRE. So there was some principles that were already in play. And this is right before the SRE Bible had come out from Google, but a lot of the folks that were spinning up this SRE team had come from Google. So it was like a kind of interesting place to be in.
Very cool. So who'd like to kind of kick off the next step? Maybe say a little bit about your introduction to SRE. How did you first get engaged in it?
I first got engaged by coming on to be an intern at Uber. And little did I know that that was actually their first intern in the site reliability engineering team, which meant that they didn't really know what to do with me, except they expected me to know a lot. And they expected me to be on call and things like it, which was an interesting process because it didn't really get thought about. I did like onboarding week of engineering, understanding systems, how to like commit code, like policies. And then second week was like onboarding into chaos engineering, SRE, and infrastructure. And in my third week, I was already on call for the chaos engineering service, which was like a tier 1, tier 2 critical service. And then I was put on secondary for the infra rotation that manages our 40 infra services that maintain like Uber up. So it was very much getting thrown into the wildfire and figure it out. So when the pages start coming in at 2, 3 in the morning for the, like, you destroy the chaos engineering service, it was like, I have a run book, but nobody has guided me on how to run on call, like whatsoever, from like the process of like, how do I let people know that I'm getting paged? So these are the actions that I'm being taken. And like, this is my first time that I'm getting close to touching production services for such a large scale system that as I'm executing stuff, I remember freaking out. And like one of my girlfriends in Miami was awake at that time. And she's just like, can't you just copy the files that you're about to delete over so that you have a backup in case it's needed? And it's like, that's not really how it works. Like if I do delete this, like it's just gone. So it was like very much thrown into the trenches, but it's made me kind of like fall in love with the world and talk about like wanting to be better about onboarding people into these systems that really matter for our customers and not just say like, go figure it out on your own.
Curious, anyone else? Austin, if you want to jump into kind of you've seen probably more than one introduction of SRE in your career, I'm guessing.
Well, when I got into SRE, they called it ops. They called it sysadmin.
Yeah.
I started out in IT kind of in the, originally in like the 90s, in an extremely different world than we have today. And when I got into software kind of officially in the 2000, late 2000s, 2010s, SRE wasn't a thing like it is today, certainly, and probably not even at the time that Anna was hired. There was this new DevOps thing, right? And I think our management tried to get everyone into it the same way that a lot of managers did, which was to buy everyone a copy of the Phoenix Project and just kind of like put that on everyone's desk one day, and it's like, oh, we're doing this now. And as the person, I will say a very similar story to Anna, though, where I kind of just wound up one day as like, well, you've been doing the most work on this, so now it's your responsibility to be on call for it. And we didn't have a rotation. We didn't have really any kind of concept of just like being off call. It's like, oh, you own this, so it's your problem now. So if it breaks at 3 a.m, then if you don't fix it then someone's going to ask you tomorrow, why wasn't it fixed? What that really led me to, I think, was that's how I discovered the cloud, and discovered like the actual utility of the cloud. And I think that's shaped a lot of, one, it shaped my interest in observability, because one of the biggest challenges of that system was that it was extremely undiagnosed, undebuggable. There was very poor observability into it. But second was the concept of, utility infrastructure and auto scaling and Kubernetes and all that good stuff. So I maybe got there in a slightly different way, and I wound up going in a slightly different direction. I will say the one thing that seems to be a commonality, I feel like, for a lot of people, and I'd be curious about the rest of the panel, at least we have 2 data points now where it's kind of like, all right, this is your job now. Have fun. No life jacket. Is that a very common way to be introduced to SRE? I'm kind of getting the feeling it might be.
Anybody else have a common experience? Yeah. Onboarding by trial by fire.
Yeah, I also started out as a sysadmin, and that was my first real job would have been in 2004, in like the infrastructure group of a large software company, and SRE didn't exist outside of Google, to my knowledge, anyway, at that period of time. Maybe it wasn't even talked about then. I don't quite remember the timeline, but after going through like all of that is trial by fire, right? Like the thing blows up, and that's the accounting system, and that's I remember being fascinated and drawn to SRE as a concept and a practice, though, because it brought reliability out of that nebulous bucket of non-functional requirements. Everybody loves NFRs; they're the best. Performance, bug-free, secure. And now all of a sudden we could talk about reliability like it actually mattered to the business. And that was just like a revelation to me. I remember reading the Phoenix Project engrossed about like the train wreck stories. And
then here you are.
Here I am.
Adrian, I'm curious your introduction too.
It's funny you mentioned the Phoenix Project, and I remember the first time I read it, I'm like, how do you know my life? It was like, you kind of revel in the train wreck. I did like that book. I know this is not turning into Phoenix Project review, but the one thing I didn't like about the book is that everything was like in a little bow at the end, and everything's like la la la, all the problems we fixed. But I feel like real life is a lot messier than that. I've not had like a quote unquote like traditional SRE role, but I've had like, I guess, SRE adjacent roles. I started working with teams towards improving practices that would help SRE teams. So did a lot of work around just improving deployment practices on Kubernetes. So I did a lot of like research around Argo CD just to, with the idea of like, Kubernetes clusters are so heinous to manage that, we need a nice overview, like holistic vision of like what the heck happening in our Kubernetes clusters, like running, what's not running, what's successful, what's not successful.
Well, I'm not sure if we'll see when we get Adriana back. Ibrahim, that's the perfect opening for you.
Yeah. So, okay. So
there you go.
I worked in a big company where we had the DevOps, ops, infrastructure all in one team. It was a really bad experience to have like more than 11 people in one team. Anyway, so in that team, we're responsible of services. And the good thing in our management it was they change new trends. So when the team topology book came out, we kind of shifted to the platform style, and slowly we were giving services to support. And then from that came more SRE roles of keeping up this production app up and everything is okay. And then I transitioned to another company where it's totally SRE. But I would agree with Austin. It was like, hey, here, we have this service issue here, and nobody would know how. There's no runbooks, and nobody will save you. And you'll have an email every maybe or a ping every half an hour what's happening, and you don't know what's happening, and you just survive there. That it was a very brutal introduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tip 1 for how to establish an SRE practice from the ground up: don't do any of that.
Yeah.
That's our first takeaway, I think.
Look before you leap, maybe.
I do love an anti-pattern.
Yeah. We'll tell you how to do this properly by telling you all the things you shouldn't do, which is the best way to learn. I think one thing that's interesting that Ibrahim really touched on there is, because you use the word trend, right? And I remember this very distinct memory actually of going and visiting a client of my last company, and they were having a lot of implementation problems, and they were wanting to learn from me, like, well, how do you all run your software, right? And because I was responsible for, this fairly massive, fairly large deployment, like 30 unique environments, with a bunch of different configurations. It was a platform as a service. And so we had to run a lot of it as sort of integration environments. And we got shipped down to King of Prussia to meet with these folks and kind of share like, well, this is what we do in terms of how to actually operationalize the how to run this. and there was a lunch that we had. I can't remember. I don't remember where, but it was an okay restaurant in a strip mall. But I remember one of the topic of conversation. Someone was like, "Have you heard about this SRE book?" And it was pretty new, I think, at that point, and it got people talking about like, well, this isn't what we're doing at all, right? Because there was, and that's one thing that kept coming up in a lot of these conversations I would have, and I think in a lot of people's, even today, like sort of their lived experience, is that people, SRE gets rebranded, right? Or system administration keeps getting rebrands. It keeps getting new coats of paint based on whatever the trends of the day are. So you'll go from, now the sysadmins are DevOps people, and what do they do? Well, they go and click on things in AWS console, and now those people are SREs, and they're going and clicking on things in the AWS console, or they're writing, a couple scripts here and there. And one thing that I think is maybe an important detail, if you are thinking about starting an SRE practice, is how do you actually define SRE, right? Like, what is the portfolio that SRE has that distinguishes it from just a software engineer? Because if you are a startup, if you are a small company, quite a few things that you would normally, you might be called upon to do as an SRE aren't necessarily problems that you're going to have right now. And if you bring in someone that is, used to this kind of trendy version of SRE where it's just another coat of paint on administration, they might not have the right skill set for you. Or they're going to try to introduce a lot of overhead that maybe isn't really super necessary when you're, a 10-person startup, for example. So, question for the group. Is SRE something that you should try to hire for? Is this something you should have someone come in and build as like a thing? Or is this something that you should kind of have your engineers figure out, like, well, what do we actually need? What are the things that we care about in terms of site reliability and in terms of a practice around it? And then either kind of having people shift roles into that, or finding, maybe external candidates who can come in and map to that vision of SRE.
I think a big part of that depends on the goals and the struggles with the business at that moment, right? Like, we're a 10-person startup and we are interested in SRE. And if we're at like this crossroads of, is this like a full-time role? Like, we're going to hire a specialist, or can we as an organization sort of start to adopt these practices? If I was in like an influencing position at that company, I think I would push for the group of 10 to start to think about reliability as like a function, like going back to, it's a non-functional requirement, but it's pretty damn important. Like, your stuff working is what your customers want. Mm-hmm. So like, and peeling that, one more time, what's even prompted this conversation? Like, are your deploys bad? Are you shipping features that are absolute bloodbaths when people go to use them? Like, what is the forcing function of this conversation? And I know I'm asking more questions, but I think that context really, really matters, because every company's, God, I hate the word journey, but I'm saying it anyway. Every company's journey is going to be a little bit different, because the context of how you're running and what you built it with and what your customers are and what your business goals are ultimately going to influence that, right? So, but from what I have seen, 10 people starting to think about reliability as like a business function, and how that can be measured, I think will do a small startup far more justice than hiring a specialist at that point.
I would agree with you. The only caveat I'd add is making sure that those people are willing to shift their mindset around that, right? Because I've seen so many organizations where they're like, we're going to become an SRE organization, and then everyone's like, okay, business as usual, and no one's actually willing to change, right? So making sure that those people that you're plunking into your SRE organization are going to be the ones that are willing to make that change happen. And I would even say, to a certain extent, it might be nice to have like someone maybe one external hire for starters, just to like inject some new ways of thinking into the team?
I think that's a good, well, just to pivot on that question real quick. I mean, is SRE something that should be approached as like a bottom up or a top down? Or, I mean, third option is it has to be both.
I think both, because you got the doers, right? You've got your SREs doing the things, but like if you've got upper management that's like, let's start an SRE organization, and then and then they basically want you to keep acting in the same way as before. Well, that's no good either, right? There needs to be buy-in, and it's got to be more than just words, right? Because I've seen that so many places where they want to just pay lip service because it's trendy, and some, they attended some like retreat where they're like, oh, you should do this. So like we like really getting those upper management folks bought in is key.
We used to call that the airline magazine article that the manager read on the way back home, right? Okay, we need to do
That's right. That's right.
I feel like it ends up being both, definitely, because from the start point, like, do you need those engineers to be able to like level up, like, well, not level up, but like surface like the reliability issues that they're having. And at the same time, like they're going to need room to learn. Like it's not that they're just going to wake up one day and be like, I know how to SRE. So you either need like money to either like consult with other folks, give them room for them to do experiments and like learning and POCs. But that comes from the top. If the top is not really bought in, like as a function, we're going to give you space. We're going to give you engineering time. We're going to be comfortable with failure because we are implementing new structures. Like those type of movements like are not going to be happening either. So it does fall into like it depends, but it kind of does come into if you have your upper leadership saying we're buying SRE, like you just start throwing money at vendors that work in this space, but no one's really like, oh, these were the issues we were having, and this is like how we go about using the tooling that we have. And at the same time, you can be uncovering all these issues, and if your upper leadership does not care or doesn't hear from the customer the pain points, they're not really going to take action on it, which I think actually ends up being like an interesting space to be in, as I've worked at like SaaS vendors in reliability space, because you end up realizing that the engineers don't really know how to even like talk about the issues that they're seeing within their infrastructure. Like they can feel the burnout. They don't know how to call it burnout. They can be agitated at like having to constantly be fixing janky tests, but not understand like where they need to commit the time, or how to like write up a proposal of like, we could be more proactive about incident by following these procedures. So sometimes like it was an interesting room of like coaching them on how to advocate for their needs.
I think on that point, that's an interesting question. Like, is there actually a sweet spot really to kind of make that flip from you have a team that's following SRE practices or that's thinking in a reliability mindset, and then transitioning to like, well, now we have a defined role and team for site reliability. Like, is there a number of engineers? Is there a number of customers? Obviously there's no hard and fast rule, right? Every business is different. Every team is different. Every organization is different. But what would we say are the characteristics of, what are the signals of like, okay, you have a reliability mindset and that's great, but now you need to think about resourcing and staffing this appropriately?
Ibrahim, I would love for you to jump in.
Yeah, I really think, in my opinion, the way software operates or the way people sell software, it matters on how you do SRE. For example, subscription model companies are different than companies who have contracts with big names only, because that will dictate how you fix things. And when there's a problem, they will tell you just patch and don't talk to me, just patch. And then all of the SRE best practices, nobody will care about. Where in subscription models, I feel like they have to follow a procedure because they have so many people subscribe. And that will be, I think, better place to do SRE. But if it's only one big customer, the most important customer, you can't bring any SRE best practice on the table when there's an issue there. You can't. You just want to survive. So I think if you want to establish an SRE team, you should have a good number of customers. Because if you're a small company or rely on one stream of income, I think it's hard to enforce these rules.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on that, like, you know, if you do, it's a fine line, right? With a startup, you've got, like, you know, say one main customer, and you want to keep them happy because otherwise, like, that's who pays your bills. But, like, at the same time, how do you manage your customers' expectations from the get-go so that they basically don't walk all over you, right? So now we're talking about, like, different another factor that affects the success of your SRE team, right? You've got, like, your individual contributors on the SRE team. We've got management making sure that they're bought in, and you've got the external factor of you know, the customers trying to influence how your practices, which I guess to a certain extent then is influencing management in terms of what they try to dictate for your SRE team. So then the question becomes, like, how do you train your customers to ensure your success and subsequently their success?
Hannah, thoughts?
I'm thinking.
Okay. It wasn't it was a statement. It was like, Anna, you're thinking. I want to ride on this point a little because I think it is very interesting about the difference in models. Not to continue this line of discussion because I think it's a completely different thing, but it does feel so much like we have crossed the Rubicon in some way in terms of, like, what is a software business anymore? Like, can anyone think of the last major company or just a startup in general where it's like, oh yeah, no, our business is selling shrink wrap software to the enterprise, right? Everyone, it's SaaS. It's SaaS all the way down, which I think just mostly indicates the importance of actually thinking about SRE. Because even if you are sort of listening to this and you are maybe a more traditional, box and shrink wrap type of place, like, you probably have customers that want delivery over the internet. They want this as a service. They want this on a subscription model. They want more flexible terms and seats. I think you see that even some of the stalwarts, like JetBrains, right? Like, look at JetBrains moving to a more, they make IDEs, sure, but they are also moving to this very subscription-heavy model, and a lot of, like, extra value in online features. Look at things like GitHub, Microsoft, I guess, which is moving towards, like, a certain more services revenue, and the market's changing, and I think that SRE and reliability more generally is just going to become a bigger and bigger part of how we consider the software industry.
And I mean, I think also, like, the last 3 years have really shown us that too, where it's like we kind of depended on technology and SaaS for just about everything, from, like, what is the status of COVID in my city to I need groceries to I need to schedule, like, a vaccine appointment. Like, a lot of people didn't have this, like, I depend on these things because they were going in person. And with a world pandemic, it's like, oh no, like, they're like, technology can make those online, but now all of a sudden, like, I'm depending on something I never even knew that I needed to depend on. And
yeah. And even, like, major, I think that the real, probably wild story of the pandemic is just the amount of industries that nobody ever would have assumed would have, like, remote workers moving to remote work, right? Like, think about all the government employees around the world, or even just in the US, who need to interact with software systems all the time, and suddenly we're doing it from home. And think about the regulatory concerns, think about the security considerations, think about how much of a nightmare that sort of stuff is normally. If the federal government can move to work from home, then basically anyone can. But that means that they need software delivered in a different way, and they will. Boy, you think FedRAMP's great. I wait till someone comes up with NIST SRE guidelines. It's going to make everyone's life super fun.
You're just making up terms, Dawson.
Yeah, that's mostly. My
You micro-influencer.
You're going to get invited to be on the working group for those guidelines. It's gonna be epic.
I'm on too many working groups. I would like to be on fewer working groups, actually. Thank you. Hey, they finally recommended that you stop doing password rotation, which means that it'll trickle down to the rest of the world in about 20 years.
Why is that?
Because password rotation doesn't actually like make things more secure.
You mean
Definitely
adding
guilty.
1, 2, 3, 4 to the end of your password?
Password
Definitely
1,
guilty.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
If it wasn't secure before, rotating it won't make it more secure.
Right. Well, actually, no. I think we're fully in tangent zone now, and I'm totally willing to keep going with it. I think the rationale is mostly that password rotation simply encourages you to record your passwords in an insecure way, right? It's like you write it on a Post-it note or you put it in a text file or whatever because you can't remember what it is this 90-day period, and that means that it's trivially easy for someone to go get it. Although, as we've seen recently, you can put all the recommendations in the world for security and safety and everything else, and someone will still put a root password and plain text in a file, and then your entire network will get owned by teenagers.
Yeah, there's a thread through some of the conversation that I think came up earlier. We have about 10 minutes left. I think it'd be great to talk about when you step into a situation. It's not just, I want to have an SRE group, right? Like I now have one and look at my shiny new SRE group. There's usually there's a why. Why are we doing this? There's a purpose. There's a set of problems that we're having. The builds are not going well. We're introducing too many bugs into production. We have performance issues. We have whatever. It seems like, isn't that one of the first questions you want to ask is like, okay, what's important here? What's not working? And what's the most important thing to solve? Is that a good question to start with?
It's a good question to start your day with in general, yes.
Agreed.
For any job, right?
For anything.
I also think because people get so fired up with these ideas, they tend to try and do it all at once as well, which that is like the most common sense thing to say in the world, yet it seems to happen all the time.
So I mean, to wear my observability cap for a second, quite literally. I mean, and obviously I'm biased here because it's a passion of mine, but I do think that one thing, it's important if you are looking at this, is to pull out sort of the through lines, right? Because most of the time in most organizations, the biggest problems all do have some commonality, right? And quite often what I personally see is that it's an observability problem or a lack thereof, right? Or at very least, it's very difficult to quantify any other problem you have without observability. So one thing to consider when you are saying like, well, we need SRE, is asking yourself if you need SRE or if you just if you think you need SRE because you literally have no idea what's going on without it. I think that to me is the real benefit of an SRE or someone who's sort of there to ride herd on the rest of the team and be like, well, actually, no, we aren't going to just like FTP files to prod, and we're not just going to like randomly kubectl apply, crap from our desktop or our laptop. We're going to do a process, and I'm going to tell you what that process is and make sure you follow it, because you obviously can't be trusted to do that yourself.
I think it's just admitting that like technology has gotten complex over the last 20 years, and we just cannot keep on doing things like maintaining our systems the way that we used to. So we have to find a way to, bring the order to the chaos. It was cute before to be able to FTP into some log files, but like that's just not going to cut it anymore. Like it's just too complex.
I would actually challenge that point, though. I don't think it was ever cute. I think people just did it because it made them feel smart.
Fair enough.
Like I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I had like dual 21-inch CRT monitors, and the green Matrix theme, and yeah.
CRT, wow.
Cranking Winamp.
Yeah, you know, like you could press the Goss and your hair moved.
Yeah.
That was good stuff. But people do that stuff because they have to, and unfortunately they then think that to do it they have to do it that way, right? Like it's this awkward dance. And like I think when stuff like pipelines and like policy gates, whether it's open policy or something else, like those should be empowering for teams if you've done them right. And if people are trying to sidestep them, that is strong signal that you have done the wrong thing for your organization. It doesn't matter that it worked somewhere else. Like at this group right now, that has caused friction, and it's the equivalent of the sticky note on the monitor to go back to like mandatory password change policies, I think.
Well, it does go back to that. Like business needs are going to be different for every single business, whether they're like selling shrink wrap or they're selling SaaS vendor, subscriptions, where it's like those gates are going to be very much different needs of the business. And it all goes back to that question of like, when you're starting an SRE practice, like what is it that you're trying to achieve? Like, is it for the customers? Is it the business goals? Is it because you literally can't write code without breaking production?
And to add to that, don't implement the Google way of doing things because that's what you think you should be doing.
The book was written by Google for Google, not for you startup land, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like everything. There's like good little nuggets and obviously take the stuff that works for you. But, I think the common theme here has been like, do what works for you.
Not everyone's running at the scale that Google is, of course.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that needs to get highlighted in the book sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
Not every startup has written a global distributed log service. No. One of the best chapters of the book.
If you haven't written 2 globally distributed log services before breakfast, then what are you even doing?
You're clearly not on the SRE.
You're clearly not on that grind set.
I'm upgrading Kubernetes versions probably.
That sounds fun.
Sounds lovely.
I mean, hey, at least you're doing it on GKE and not something that isn't GKE, right?
No comment.
I spent a lot of time this weekend playing around with Kubernetes, and it's amazing to me. It's like, actually, not to derail again, but I think it is fascinating to me how concomitant like SRE as a defined job role has been with Kubernetes. Because I remember when Kubernetes was brand new, and I remember seeing like version 0 of like Kelsey's Kubernetes the hard way and going through it and being like, wow, this really sucks. And we had built a Kubernetes installer that I can't remember the name of. I have to go look it up in GitHub. But we built this Kubernetes installer that kind of was meant for like installing Kubernetes onto, dedicated hardware or into like virtual machines or whatever. This is pre-GKE, pre-everything. And I went through and it's amazing to me how much better managed Kubernetes has gotten until you need to do literally anything with it. And then it's like, oh, this is actually 20 times worse than it ever was because this Kubernetes has sprawled into being kind of all things for all people, all possible container orchestration scenarios. And it's like, this is incredibly confusing and I have no clue what I'm doing anymore. So I think if you are a smaller organization, for whatever reason you started building on Kubernetes, then you should probably hire an SRE just so you have someone that knows what the heck's going on with K8s, because I don't think anyone else does.
I would even take a step back and ask yourself, do you need Kubernetes?
Yeah, I think there's two minds of it, right? Like this is an interesting, fun conversation for you, everyone. If you meet up in person at some point, find your biggest competitor, or find a colleague at a company that isn't yours, and compare and contrast the engineering decisions that started and where they've led. because I think you actually see really interesting distinctions between groups of like, this is the people that started building on kind of this is people that started like monolith, scale it up until it breaks, and then rebuild the world. Then you have the people that were like very, very attached to a particular cloud. Then you have people that kind of attach themselves to different sort of orchestration systems and other fabric technologies, foundational technologies. It's very interesting to kind of trace that history with people and just in conversation and see like what broke for you that also broke for them, but also what did you avoid that they didn't. And to bring it to the topic of SRE, I think that's actually a really good practice for everyone that's in software reliability or just like that's curious about how to build software. Like talk to people that aren't you. Like take the opportunity to learn from other people about their like what went well for them, what didn't go well for them. Like share more. We should all be a lot more. We should be friends more.
I think that's great advice. We are out of time. Yeah, Anna, you kicked off the topic. I'd love for you to kind of wrap it up with your parting thoughts, either from the conversation or if there's something you wanted to add that we hadn't gotten to.
I think for me, when you're starting to consider like how to start your SRE organization, like don't just run because you are trying to reach for those reliability nines. Really try to understand the pain points of your organization and understand what your customers are needing. Like, what is it that they're missing out on your experience? Like, really sit down and interview them and try to make that customer obsession translate into an experience that they're going to like.
Fantastic. Austin, any parting thoughts before we wrap up?
I think this was a great discussion. I'm really excited to see what everyone out there on the internet thinks. Be sure to drop us a comment or like argue with me about how we should actually all be enemies or something. I don't know. But I think this is a good discussion, and I think that it's these kind of discussions that help advance the industry. So
in a way, this was fulfilling what you described, sharing our experiences and our knowledge.
Exactly.
Right?
Also, yeah, and to go back and to really bring it full circle, please don't just throw your SREs or DevOps people into service ownership with no life vest and no run book and no nothing. Because boy, that seems like a really common occurrence and doesn't feel very good. Kind of sucks.
All right, with that, we'll wrap things up. By the way, Jason, I think they called in the Phoenix project, Brent was the person who was the rock star that was FTPing into production, right? If I recall. So, all right, thank you everybody for joining us. Austin, it's always great to co-host. And Anna, thanks for you for germinating, bringing this idea to life for our conversation today. And thanks for all of our guests. Thanks for joining us. We'll have another episode of the SRE Show up soon, so please check back. Thanks for being here with us.
Looking for a live conference focused on the tools, technologies, and practices most important to your business? Innotech conferences are live one-day business and technology conferences highlighting the latest in trends for IT leaders, developers, and IT professionals. Each event combines education, innovation, peer-to-peer networking, and the latest technology and business solutions for a diverse IT-focused audience. Innotech conferences occur throughout the year in strategic regional locations, bringing together technology professionals from various industries to learn about the solutions, practices, and tools impacting their day-to-day work and gain insight into what's to come. Presenters at Innotech conferences are selected and curated to ensure each session provides the most up-to-date and relevant information without any hype. Whether you're interested in digital transformation, cybersecurity, cloud, IT leadership, or DevOps, Innotech conferences deliver. 2022 events are scheduled to be held in Austin, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, and Washington, D.C. Innotech conferences are produced by Techstrong Live and powered by Techstrong Group.
Hey everyone, happy Monday. Cody J. Brown here with some upcoming programs from Techstrong Learning. So first on the docket for tomorrow, Tuesday, October 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern, join builders from Dataset and AWS as they cover challenges with scaling Kubernetes, common Kubernetes errors, and effective ways to detect, troubleshoot, and prevent them. Join us for Scaling Kubernetes with Dataset and AWS. The following day, Wednesday, October 12th at 11 a.m. Eastern, Bunny Shell is joining us on DevOps.com for creating ephemeral environments for CI/CD GitOps pipelines with Kubernetes. This learning experience will discuss how to use Kubernetes to create cost-effective, short-term testing environments that look like production. And kicking off right after, Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, the Fairwinds teams will demonstrate how to configure your Kubernetes clusters to avoid auto-scaling issues and ensure your apps are ready to scale properly. So join us for AWS Carpenter Readiness. Are your apps ready to move? That's all I've got for you right now, but we do have plenty of upcoming and on-demand programs for you here at Techstrong Learning, so stay tuned.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with AJ Grotto, who is with the Cyber Policy Center from Stanford, and we're going to be talking about exactly what is the impact that all these new requirements from the federal government are going to have on software providers, and maybe what that means for larger enterprises. Hey AJ, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the good news is the government's a lot more interested in this whole software development process. They are starting to put these regulations together. They've been in various forms in effect for a year, and CISA has thrown out more awareness from folks about issues related to application security. But when we take a giant step back, what's your sense of the ultimate impact this is going to be on the providers of software? What do they need to be thinking about, and what needs to change?
Well, obviously the goal of these measures is to require federal agencies to demand more secure products from their vendors. And for a long time now, the broader sort of enterprise ecosystem has not demanded security the way that I think many of us in the policy community would prefer. It's been kind of a long slog over the past, say, 15, 20 years of incident after incident demonstrating real problems with many of the dominant software out there. The government historically has had a real challenge with IT. It is a difficult customer for vendors. It's hard for the government to adopt new technology, keep technology fresh, and this series of efforts that the Biden administration has pursued really goes back to the Obama administration, and so across the Trump administration and into this administration to get the government to demand better security as part of sort of a broader call it a refresh of IT procurement.
Do you think, therefore, that the software supply chains and the processes that we use to develop software are, for all intents and purposes, fundamentally broken, and we're going to ask people to go back and kind of revisit that whole thing end to end?
Well, I can only look at the artifacts, the outputs of that process, which aren't great, and on the one hand, vulnerabilities are going to happen in software. That's just the nature of the beast when you have complex systems. vulnerability. We're never going to get rid of vulnerabilities entirely. That said, if you just look at the ecosystem of software out there, there are some systems that are evidently more secure than others, whether that's because they, fewer vulnerabilities emerge, whether that's because the systems themselves are easier for users to configure. I mean, usability is really a key part of security that doesn't get as much attention as sort of the focus on vulnerabilities and whatnot. The fact that some do better than others suggests to me that there is room for improvement, that there is an opportunity to raise the tide for all boats, which I think is a real top goal for these actions we've seen coming out of the administration.
A lot of the focus seems to be on software bill of materials, otherwise known as the list of ingredients that are included in the software. And that's wonderful, I guess. But to what degree is that going to be useful, do you think? Are we going to see systems put in place where organizations are going to red light, green light applications that they're going to consume based on what's in those SBOMs? Is that where we're headed?
Possibly, yeah. And the other, so there's this classic a study in economics from the early 1970s by George Akerlof, who would later win the Nobel Prize in economics for this line of work, where the article involved a market for lemons. And at its base, the idea behind the article is that if you have a market where consumers have a hard time differentiating product quality, poor quality products end up flooding that market because consumers aren't willing to pay a premium for quality if they can't tell which products have more quality than others. If consumers aren't willing to pay a premium for quality, then vendors are unwilling to invest additional resources it takes to produce quality products. And so you end up with a market flooded with what he called lemons. One could argue that the software market is very much has a lot of the characteristics of a market for lemons, where the quality feature is security. If consumers can't tell which products are more secure than others, then their ability to choose a more secure product is obviously limited. And so the software bill of materials is, I think, really aimed at trying to solve for that problem. It's to make that's a major rationale for it. It's just to help purchasers in the government or elsewhere make more informed buying decisions. Now, the other benefit of an SBOM is, once a purchasing decision has been made, in theory, having a catalog of the different software libraries and components that are in a system ought to make it easier, more straightforward. I didn't say easier for organizations to understand when a vulnerability emerges, whether their system is affected by that vulnerability, so that they can make risk-informed decisions about whether and hopefully when to patch that system.
There are a lot of bills now floating around Congress that seem to be extensions of this activity that might be more broadly applied. We're starting to see the U.S. Department of Commerce, or the Chamber of Commerce, that's it, the folks who are on the business side, along with all kinds of agencies kind of starting to lobby against some of those regulations because they're basically saying it's overly intrusive and it will slow things down. I think it was Ronald Reagan who once said the 9 most dangerous words in the English language are something to the effect of, hello, I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. So how do we kind of get to something that's reasonable for everybody concerned to maybe not have a market full of lemons, but not slow things down to the point where the rate at which innovation occurs starts to choke?
If the government were in a position to purchase IT at the very cutting edge, and I would have more sympathy for that critique, but the government is typically going to be purchasing technology that is not at the cutting edge. And so the argument for slowing down, I think, doesn't hold a ton of weight for me. Now, when we think about the broader sort of, I mean, obviously the government's not the only customer of IT in the country and in the world. There's an argument to be made that, look, I mean, innovation is important, right? But there's more to innovation than just new products. If we consider security to also be a valid and valuable domain for innovation, then in theory, at least, regulations could actually help drive innovation in that respect. Now, I'm the devil's always in the details. I'm a pragmatist when it comes to regulation, meaning that I'm neither. I look at it as a tool. Sometimes that tool is the right tool for the job. Other times it isn't. And I think as someone who has followed cybersecurity now for many years from a variety of different vantage points, from the White House, where I served in the National Security Council, the Department of Commerce, a federal agency on the Hill. I worked in the U.S. Senate, and now as a researcher. The problem is getting worse, not better. And so, maybe we should slow down, right? I mean, maybe there may well be an argument for it, and I think we've perhaps over-indexed on innovation, where innovation is understood as new features without necessarily focusing on some of the other quality attributes that matter, like security and safety.
So to that point, do you think that we're having the equivalent of a Ralph Nader moment here where software is unsafe at any speed and, we're basically, driving around at 60 miles an hour with no seatbelts and going to crash, right?
Unfortunately, I don't. I've the other sort of occupational hazard of having spent, a long time in this field is every couple of years, there's an incident where sort of the punditocracy says, oh, this is it, right? This is the moment. This is the wake up call. And, really nothing really changes, at least in terms of a paradigm shift along the lines of what Nader's, book in the 1960s did, which was to essentially spur Congress to create the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. And I just don't, I see a more incremental sort of process before us. It's worth, sort of dwelling for a moment on why that might be the case. I mean, obviously there's sort of an anti-regulatory political, stream in Washington and the country writ large. I mean, that exists. And so, it's always going to be an uphill climb for Congress to authorize agencies to pursue new regulations. The other factor is an economic one, which is that, whenever an organization or an actor is in a position to make risk decisions and they don't bear the costs of those decisions, then their incentive to buy down risk is small. If you go back to, to the Ralph Nader, to the 1960s when this happened, when sort of the modern, automobile safety regime occurred, it was really obvious, who was injured by unsafe cars, right? It was, friends, family members, people could see it, right, and feel it, and so just the way that the costs were distributed hit home for Americans really hard. In the case of software, oftentimes, so we think about, vendors, for example, companies that produce IT. Oftentimes by way of contract, they offload liability for harm. They disclaim warranties onto the customer. And so unless the customer somehow demands more security, the vendor has a smaller incentive to provide it. In the case of, those customers, oftentimes, if an organization suffers a cyber incident, yeah, I mean, they bear some pain, but oftentimes it may be, if you go back to the Equifax hack from a couple of years ago, obviously it hurt Equifax, but gosh, I mean, it was, you and me and your listeners who, in many ways sort of bore the brunt of that attack because it was our credit information that was compromised. And, we bore that cost, yet we had no agency over that risk decision. And again, whenever situations like that emerge, the incentives for action are, I think, are limited. And you see this time and time again, not just in software, but just across the economy. It's if I can make a risk decision and not bear the cost of that risk decision, like why would I spend more, pay more, expend more resources to buy down risk? Doesn't benefit me, and I don't bear the cost.
So is the answer going to be more regulations, or is it more of a free market decision where, we just need the equivalent of Albert Finney to stand up and say, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore?
I think it's a bit of all the above. I think, it's important to, to separate this lemons problem, which has to do with consumers not having good information about security attributes, from sort of an underlying demand question, right? So the example I use in my teaching when I present this is, imagine if there was if all of a sudden software vendors decided to develop a way to differentiate code developed by guys and gals in flip-flops and hoodies from those that don't. Is that all of a sudden going to result in an outpouring of demand for software coded by guys and gals? And so no, it's not. I mean, no one cares about that, right? So having more information doesn't necessarily lead to better quality unless that quality is demanded still. And so it starts with demand, right? I mean, customers of IT have to demand better security, and that's really, I think, what the administration is trying to do with a lot of these actions over the last 12, 18 months is push the federal enterprise towards demanding more security. And then measures like the SBOM then help customers, against the backdrop of higher, demanding more security, to actually decide, okay, which products are more secure than others, which products are going to be easier, for me, an IT administrator, me, a CISO, a CIO, to administer and throughout its life cycle.
All right, folks, you heard it here. This game is moving beyond just whack-a-mole for vulnerabilities. It's becoming an economic conversation, and it's going to impact just about everybody. Hey, AJ, thanks for being on the show.
Always. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Maria Bada, who's a behavioral science expert working with AwareGo. And we're going to be talking about what happens with end users in terms of security, and also maybe the security people themselves, and maybe we're all just driving each other nuts in some sort of circle. But Maria, welcome to the show.
Hi, hello. Thanks for inviting me.
Right. So you guys conducted a study, and you've been looking into what goes on with both end users and also how people respond on the cybersecurity side. But why don't you give us some of the highlights of the study? What did you guys found, and what surprised you?
Yes, definitely. And to be honest, we had a couple of surprises there. So AwareGo has been providing training and awareness for many years. So a couple of years back, we started considering, okay, we need to kind of identify what currently is happening, what are the needs, because so many people are actually talking about how awareness training and programs like that are not effective. They're not working in the long term. So we might kind of succeed in changing short-term behaviors of employees, but that doesn't last long. And we know in psychology and behavioral science that that is a bit challenging, and it does take time and effort. So we wanted to really kind of review the current situation. So we went back to our clients and we conducted a survey and also interviews in order to really understand their current needs, whether things are changing, whether we see something else that we need to cover. And basically, just to begin with that, most of our clients were mentioning the need for more personalization in training programs. So usually most companies will have a one-off training, but it won't necessarily cover the needs of specific departments within an organization or specific employees. And here I will bring in the discussion of, employees working for HR and employees working as information security officers, for example, or CEOs. So when I talk about personalization, I really mean all the levels and the needs, the different needs of different employees within organizations. So we ran this study. We actually collected, and we had 160 participants in our survey, and we ran 10 interviews as well, mainly with either information security experts, cybersecurity experts within companies, or CEOs, CISOs, educators. So we kind of have a breadth of participants there. And we kind of try to identify their knowledge, but also aspects such as, do they run an awareness raising program in their company? Or if they do, how often do they run that program? If they don't, why not? And I guess it was not a surprise to see that the majority of these organizations were running actually an awareness program, and that was coming out as a strategic decision, either from the kind of board level of the CISO level. So they were really considering awareness as an important aspect within their organization. However, these trainings were either running a couple times a year or, once a month, which is not necessarily a negative aspect at all. And really what we are trying to do, and I will talk about that a bit more, is to identify what is the golden kind of solution. How often or how rarely do you need to train employees to avoid security fatigue? But apart from that, we were also interested in, for example, why are they running these programs? What is the kind of goal of having and conducting an awareness program for employees? And the main aspect there was, again, as a strategic decision, and of course, out of the need for compliance to either GDPR or other standards and best practices. And mainly what our participants mentioned as really the focus of these trainings were, of course, phishing simulations they were running, but also around password handling, sensitive data. And overall, I think the majority were talking about compliance overall, as I mentioned. It was not a surprise as well that the majority of participants, as I mentioned, coming from different levels, different expertise, were very confident around understanding what sensitive data is. For example, that they would never use an unsecured Wi-Fi, or that they could recognize a phishing email. So that confidence can sometimes be problematic. And here comes the first kind of surprise, because out of this study and really the tests we conducted, we saw that some of the participants, they were not really able to identify a phishing email, or they fell really for one of the kind of tricky questions we had on the strength of a password. We were asking them to check the strength of their password, and some of them typed it in. And the trick was they shouldn't even type the password in, even if someone asks you to do that. So we saw some really problematic behaviors and some surprises there. And just to mention that when we tested our product, the human risk assessment, again with experts or employees from different departments, we saw an overall kind of resilience reaching maybe 70% out of 100. In really across all our threat areas. So, and I guess password strength was one of them, which I mentioned. But that again kind of causes a question in terms of, okay, how can you be so confident that you have, you have the answers, you have the knowledge, and of course, then you kind of show the secure behavior when needed. When we actually saw using the human risk assessment that this is really not the case. And this is really how we utilized the results from our study to really start working on developing the human risk assessment, which is something like a phishing simulation, but we kind of used a completely different approach, using fun scenarios, very relevant and personalized, as I mentioned, to specific employees. And really the outcome and the results provided out of the human risk assessment can help either managers or whoever is running and organizing an awareness campaign within the company to identify who needs what in terms of training. And this is why we can shape a more kind of personalized approach in the programs we provide. And that's briefly, very briefly, what we did and how this really fed into our work.
How do we make the training more compelling? I think a lot of people look at the training programs and it's kind of feels like I'm going to traffic school after I got a speeding ticket, and it's just not quite all that engaging. Everybody's just trying to get through it and go back to their regular job. So how do we make this something that more end users are going to look at and say, yeah, that was interesting or helpful?
Yes, spot on. This is the case. And I mentioned already security fatigue. We can't really push employees to take the trainings unless we follow kind of a more mandatory approach, which many organizations do. As I mentioned, such trainings need to find the golden balance. How often or how rarely do you need to provide them? They need to be personalized. They need to be relevant. So I can't really have scenarios that have nothing to do with a certain employee's everyday job. So if they're not relevant and related to what I'm doing, of course, I will not pay attention. And many actually of the experts we spoke to or who participated in our study really ignore these trainings because they know all that. They've had so many trainings in the past. They work in cybersecurity. They're the information security officers. So they pay no attention because usually these trainings provide trivial information, basic information. Usually they're targeting employees who have no experience in cybersecurity. So this is really what we're trying to change, provide that kind of incentive and motivation for employees to actually participate and pay attention. And for that, I think AwareGo has managed that for years out of the very funny and short videos that are being used in the training programs. But now, as I said, with the human risk assessment, we have another tool to make trainings even more personalized and kind of target that element, kind of motivate and kind of gain attention of employees. I think this is what everyone is struggling with in this area.
Yeah. They are the first line of defense, but we also need cybersecurity people that are trained. We have a chronic shortage. What is the real challenge in kind of getting more people trained on cybersecurity to become a cybersecurity professional? It seems like there's a large uphill curve. Can we kind of reduce that?
Yes, very good question. There's so many discussions around this and so many different paths that people can follow to actually go into cybersecurity. So starting from being an academic or starting from doing something completely irrelevant and then moving into cybersecurity. I think the discussions now are, due to that skills shortage, go towards, okay, how can we, as you said, how can we shorten that path, or how can we provide skills and trainings and maybe certifications that will be enough, at least for specific positions, just to cover that skills gap and take it from there. So I know that, especially, for example, in the UK, there are discussions within the government to actually kind of progress into that. How could this look like? But also for me, it's how do you attract young people and potentially girls and women in kind of joining this, the area of cybersecurity and this profession? Because again, there are challenges. There are many problematic issues around this, and the amount of work, the potential heavy load of work in these professions. But I think at an international level, there is now, we're realizing there is a gap. And without people to cover the needs, we will be in serious trouble. So I think we will be seeing different pathways, shorter pathways that people can follow, definitely.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily need to have a 4-year degree to get into the cybersecurity business per se, but we need to find some way to streamline this training for folks that's easily consumed. Is that what we're aiming for?
Yeah. No, I agree, definitely. I mean, I know that people that have, master's degrees, PhDs, and the problem is that these people who have the experience and knowledge and, of course, certificates, they will reach or they will target high positions, but still we need people who will do programming, who will do, specific tasks that a manager wouldn't do, or a CEO. So again, definitely we need to find a way that will accomplish that, or that, as I said, will bring young people into these professions.
Speaking of diversity, it seems like part of the issue is that it's not necessarily that people are trying to figure out who's going to get what job based on race, creed, or color. It just seems like they're so busy fighting the fight that they don't have time to turn around and train then other people who might come and help them. And then it becomes this kind of vicious cycle. So how do we get the folks that have the expertise today to take a minute or take a breath and help train the next generation of folks that are going to hopefully lighten the load? That again goes back to the demand in the market and how organizations are allocating or not funds for positions in information security and cybersecurity. So if you have one information security officer in your company and they have to do everything, and in many cases, they actually do privacy compliance, they do everything. There's no time to train others. There's really no time. So unless you take and you recruit more people, even if they're junior, in these positions to cover some of that heavy load, I don't think there is a way. So I think what is coming in the next years, as I said, is I expect to see junior positions bringing in people and then kind of following different pathways, either providing them training to become a privacy expert or a security expert, or kind of in order to cover some of that demand and need. But to my mind, and because of the work I'm doing with AwareGo and around small and medium enterprises, the challenge is with them because they usually won't have the resources to do that. So what do we do there? And that's really a challenge that we're already facing. Yes. As we think through this whole problem, do you think also we need to train people who aren't quote unquote security experts? It seems like we're relying more on IT operations people to execute some of the security policies, application developers. We talk about shifting left. And so the whole cybersecurity training education thing perhaps needs to be more pervasive than we think about it today.
Yes, totally agree. It's not just, as we said, the experts. We need to avoid, at least have a certain level of a firewall, a human firewall of coming from all employees. So I think at all levels, users and employees should have a basic understanding of how to avoid a phishing attack, for example, and not to open links, not to open attachments. But to do that, you still need to kind of be aware of the culture of your organization, the level of resilience of your employees, the potential risks you're facing. And to be honest, many companies don't really have that knowledge and understanding of their own organizational culture. So I think that's one of the reasons why we work towards developing the human risk assessment, which you can use as a standalone tool to run that kind of risk threat assessment and understanding the resilience levels of your employees and then kind of target that. So for me, it's kind of, I'm seeing cybersecurity as a holistic kind of matter. It's not just about the training of the information security officer. It's the training of all employees, but also the entire culture of an organization, because that can impact so much. So yeah, totally agree with your points.
So what's your best advice to folks right now who are contemplating all this? It's kind of a struggle and it deals with as much the technology as the emotional components of all the people involved. Security professionals clearly don't think like everybody else in the world, and that's probably a good thing. But how do we kind of look at this from a behavioral perspective?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, for me, the most important part is kind of looking back at the culture, the organizational culture, focus on employees. Be aware of the potential risks. We see a lot of denial coming from certain organizations, for example, that they won't be a target of a ransomware attack, or they won't face these types of attacks because they're a small company. They're not that important, for example, or they're not a big player. But we see that, for example, ransomware attacks are hitting SMEs as well, or individual users. So we kind of need to pay a bit more attention and take it a step at a time. Like, there's no need to panic. So there is advice out there. I know that the advice provided is most of the times not coordinated and not really presented in one location where people know where to look for that information. So you have to kind of dig out all that. But with a bit of effort, you can at least take basic measures to protect an organization, or even if you are an individual user, your kind of online presence. I think for me, it's all about understanding that you could be a victim and really take small steps in order to protect your online presence, your accounts, or even your entire organization. And avoid extreme situations, because we have many cases now of, you must have heard of zero trust, the approach that many organizations are taking. And if employees actually fail some of the phishing simulations once or twice, I think they are out, they will be fired. So I think for me, that is a very extreme situation. You're pushing employees away with a tactic like that. We need to really, and this is what we're doing, we're really trying to understand how we can shape behaviors in the long term, because a successful simulation once a year will not really prove that my employees are resilient. So.
All right, folks, you heard it here. Cybersecurity training is fundamental, but the emphasis needs to be on the word, perhaps, fun, and make it entertaining. Hey, Maria, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This This is Techstrong TV.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Open Source Summit. We're here in Dublin, Ireland. It's beautiful and it's gorgeous. And we have Nicole Popla who's with us, and she's in charge of safety for the Zephyr project. Zephyr is in charge of the real-time operating systems for embedded systems and edge computing platforms. And she's going to figure out ways to work with people to use that in use cases that require a high amount of safety. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi. Nice to be here.
Nice to meet you. So why does this need a special program? What's difficult about it? What's the challenges, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and what let's say the base that we're trying to accomplish with, let's say, the safety section of the Zephyr project is to have this, neat little embedded operating system in safety-related applications, so that there's an operating system available in open source that is reliable enough and that you can trust, and that has everything you need for the safety compliance approval of a complete system. So really, from base to application.
So these systems are really hardened in that they need to be, absolutely reliable. Will there be tests or certifications, or how will that kind of play out?
We're aiming for a safety certification in the end, which is a combination of having an audit and an assessment, and then providing from our side all these reliability information, which is tests. That's something that's already done in the Zephyr project, but bring this into a format that safety certification really accepts this as proof of test, as proof of complete coverage. That's something that we are currently working on.
Now, the folks who build these types of applications already have some systems in place. What's in it for them to go with an open source? What's going to be the attraction? What will get them to stand up and go, ooh, I can't wait?
It's the main thing that you always have when you go open source. You are completely vendor neutral. You are avoiding locked-in mechanisms. You find an open community to interact with. You have a better chance to, let's say, to also work with the project to get feature requests or functionality requests to the project. You can get involved. It's open, so it's you're not so dependent as on, let's say, the standard operating system vendors.
And hopefully the total cost will be lower too, right?
I think so, but it's the total cost in the sense of how much do I pay for a license? You won't pay for a license, but you still have the efforts of integrating and of testing in your context. So I'm sure in the end, I think the business people would need to answer that, because that's more to the total cost of an operating system in your project than simply the cost for a license. In the end, I think for full or higher volume products, it for sure will be lower cost.
Anything involving safety tends to attract a lot of attention from governments. So are you going to help work with the government side of these things and say to these people, Zephyr's reliable, and work with the manufacturers, or will you leave that to the manufacturers and they'll take care of that, or how involved will you guys be?
So from the safety point of view, we're not involved with the government. So the government now is, all governments are facing the security topics. So with the safety, I think it's more the staple that's always there, that you expect a car to be safe. You expect a medical device to not kill the patient. You just expect safety to be there for the last 20, 30, 50 years. So you just expect it to be there. And the security is the one thing that's now popping up into all faces and saying, okay, we also want a security. We rely on the safety wherever it's coming from, and we want the security. So at the moment, the focus of the government is very strong on the security, which also affects the safety. So you can't really separate things, but let's say with government interaction, we leave this to the security guys at the moment.
All right. Do you think there'll be a lot of lawyers involved as we go forward? It seems like there's opportunities for all kinds of misunderstandings and litigation.
There are lawyers always involved with the safety. It's with product reliability and one aim of following these safety certification or safety compliance programs is to show to lawyers, to show when in the end you have a crash or something that will affect people negatively, and you have to prove that you did everything possible to avoid this. So that's more or less the aim of showing safety compliance, showing compliance with state-of-the-art methods, showing compliance with architectural schemes on how to provide a reliable and robust system. And that's lawyers are always involved with a sense of checking in the case something goes wrong, who is to blame. So it's more or less also avoiding the blame game. Having really proof, you can always say I have the best engineers, I have the best process, I have the best product, but you need to prove that. You need to prove that it's best also in the sense of reliability, of not killing people.
What do people underestimate about being in these use cases, and what is it that in your experience you've seen people kind of overlook and then get hung up on later that they should have worked on earlier?
I'd say from a technical perspective, it's always, okay, we need to have a safe product, and let's buy a bunch of safe components, plug them together and have a safe product. And it's actually more to that. So it's always about the architecture of the complete system, so that the components, however expensive they have been or however great the certification results are, that they really fit together and that they fit the use case of your product. So that's when we go back to an operating system that is really as flexible, as configurable, and as reliable in the configurations as it can get.
Right. And we're talking about use cases that could involve personal health care or whatever, because it's a really small operating system and it can go into devices that might be in your ear like this one. And so it will have a lot of implications in terms of lifestyle that go beyond just, whether or not it's secure from a hacking perspective. So if that's the case, should people start writing applications for this with those goals in mind? And if I'm a software developer, what should I be thinking about for the software that's going to sit on top of these devices? Do I need a safety review for that too? And what does it look like?
Yeah, sure. So what I said before, it's not just only plugging things together and getting certified components for it. It's also, does this fit together? So from the Zephyr perspective, we will provide information on how an application or how also the underlying hardware needs to look to work with this safety operating system. So on the one hand side, when you look about developers writing applications, follow or read the safety manual, follow also best practices for your own application. So make it as robust, make it as having no flaws, with sense of you don't try to avoid vulnerabilities, try to avoid unspecified behavior. Make sure you really implement what you wanted to implement, that you think about a safe and sound product architecture, that you think about a safe and sound safety concept, that you say, okay, what can go wrong with my product and how do I want to avoid this? And then how can I detect the things that I want to avoid, and what do I do if I detect this? So really go from that, think about what can go wrong, how can I detect this, how can I avoid this, and what will I do if I detect this? And then, follow the procedures, follow sound engineering principles.
So is there a Zephyr safety manual, or is somebody writing that?
There will be. So it's an ongoing process. So we really started with setting up what we need and identifying safety claims and safety requirements, or let's say the safety functionality, the scope that the project will provide for a safety application. And that information will go into the safety manual, plus the information how to really integrate it, plus information how do I test that my application and Zephyr works together in a safe way.
Are you looking for volunteers to help with this? I mean, are you recruiting folks? Okay, so what ideally would you need from folks? Or what?
So at the moment, attendance in the safety committee is limited to members of the project. But you can always contact us with our Discord channel. There's a product Discord channel. There's a safety channel inside that's open for everybody. If you want to get involved, contact us. We will find a way to integrate you to the project, hopefully. And yeah, we're always happy to cooperate and to talk to people who want to know about the current status, who have requests regarding safety, who have an actual use case that they're working on with, and they want to use Zephyr. So we depend a lot about interaction, and that's maybe also one of the nice things of open source. You can always contact us. We're open to requests, we're open to questions, we're open to collaborations.
All right, folks, a little bit of a reminder, safety first. Hey, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
And we'll be back in a few minutes.
Hi again, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode of Techstrong TV. We had a set of amazing interviews with industry professionals to keep you up to date with the latest news. And alongside the airing of the SRE show, we had plenty of great content. We'll be back again tomorrow, so we hope to see you then. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, stay strong. Techstrong.